Three small bodies lay motionless in the Montana snow. Jake Morrison's heart hammered against his ribs as he dismounted, his boots crunching through the ice crust. December cold bit at his lungs, but fear hit harder. The burned-out wagon behind him told part of the story, another family destroyed by the brutal frontier winter. But these weren't adults scattered in the wreckage. They were children. The oldest couldn't be more than 12, her thin arms wrapped protectively around two smaller forms. A boy, maybe 6 years old, and a baby with tangled blonde curls, barely walking age. Dead, Jake thought, and something inside him shattered. Then the baby's chest moved. Just a flutter, barely visible, but movement. Jake dropped to his knees in the snow, his hands shaking as he reached for the little girl. Her skin was waxy white, lips blue with hypothermia, but when he pressed his ear to her chest, he heard it, the faint, desperate rhythm of a heart refusing to give up. "Hey," he whispered urgently, gathering the tiny form against his coat. "Hey, little one, stay with me." The oldest girl's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. When she saw Jake leaning over her siblings, terror blazed across her features. "No." The word came out as a croak, but she tried to sit up, tried to shield the younger children with her body. "Don't touch them. Get away." Jake raised his hands, palms out, though he kept the baby pressed against his chest, trying to share his body heat. "Easy, miss. I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Jake Morrison. I'm here to help." "Liar." The girl's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of someone who'd learned not to trust anyone. Men always hurt. They killed Mama. They burned everything. Through the silence of the snow-covered wasteland, Jake could hear it now, the girl's labored breathing, the boy's unconscious whimpering, the baby's heartbeat growing fainter against his chest. These children had maybe an hour before the cold finished what violence had started. The decision came without conscious thought. Jake shrugged out of his heavy wool coat and wrapped it around all three children, creating a cocoon of shared warmth. "I don't know what happened to your mama," he said quietly, "but I know what's going to happen to you if we don't get you warm right now. You're going to die. All three of you." The girl's defiance cracked, and tears froze on her cheeks before they could fall. "We don't have anywhere to go." "You do now," Jake said, lifting the baby in one arm and helping the boy to his feet with the other. The child was barely conscious, swaying on legs that could no longer support his weight. "Can you walk?" Jake asked the girl. She nodded, though Jake could see the lie in how she struggled to stand. But there was steel in her spine, the kind of strength that kept people alive when everything else failed. "What's your name, miss?" "Mary." The word came out through chattering teeth. "This is Tommy, and the baby is Emma." "Well, Mary, Tommy, and Emma," Jake said, settling Emma more securely in his arms, "you're coming home with me." The girl, Mary, stared at him with eyes that had seen too much death, too much cruelty. "Why? What do you want from us?" Jake looked down at Emma's peaceful face, at Tommy clinging to his sister's hand, at Mary's fierce protectiveness despite her own desperate need. Something shifted in his chest, a wall crumbling that he'd built 15 years ago when he'd lost his own sister to men who'd promised her safety. "I don't want anything," he said simply. "I just can't watch children die when I have the power to save them." As he led them toward his horse, Jake had no idea that rescuing 3 orphans from a Montana blizzard would cost him everything he thought he wanted and give him everything he'd never known he needed. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jake said quietly, his voice barely audible over the wind. He moved slowly, the way he would approach a spooked horse. "My name's Jake. I'm going to help you." The girl, clearly the leader of this desperate little group, shook her head violently. "Mama said don't trust strangers. Go away." But Jake could see what she couldn't yet accept. The baby's lips were blue with cold, and the boy's eyes had the glassy look that meant hypothermia was setting in. They had maybe an hour before the cold killed them. "Your mama was right," Jake said, crouching down to make himself less threatening. "But she's not here to protect you now, is she? And these little ones?" He gestured gently to the baby, who had stopped crying and was now ominously still. "They need help right now, or they won't see morning." The girl's fierce mask cracked, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "She's so cold," she whispered. "Emma won't wake up anymore." Jake's training from his army days kicked in. He wrapped his coat around all 3 children, then scooped up the baby. Emma was frighteningly light, her skin waxy pale. But when he pressed his ear to her chest, he heard the faint flutter of her heartbeat. "She's alive, but barely," he told the older girl. "What's your name, miss?" "Mary." The word came out as a sob. "This is Tommy, and the baby is Emma. Our wagon." Indians came and... "Later," Jake said firmly. "Right now we need to get you warm." He lifted Emma into his arms, feeling how her tiny body trembled with cold. "Can you and Tommy walk a little way? I've got a camp not far from here." Mary nodded, pulling her little brother to his feet. Tommy swayed, his legs weak from cold and hunger, but Mary supported him with surprising strength for such a small girl. Jake led them through the snow to where his horse waited, steam rising from the animal's nostrils. He had provisions for a week in his saddlebags: beans, hardtack, coffee, and most importantly, a bottle of whiskey that might help warm their blood. His camp was nothing more than a windbreak he'd built between two large rocks, but he had a good fire going and a pot of coffee that was still warm. Jake settled the children close to the flames, wrapping them in his bedroll and spare blankets. "Drink this," he said, pouring coffee into a tin cup and adding a splash of whiskey. "Just sip it. It'll warm you from the inside." Mary took the cup with shaking hands, helping Tommy drink first, then the baby. Emma's eyes fluttered open at the warmth, and she made a small mewling sound that was the most beautiful thing Jake had heard in years. As color slowly returned to their faces, Jake allowed himself to breathe again. They would live. But as he looked at these three small faces, so vulnerable and trusting now in the flickering firelight, a cold weight settled in his stomach. What the hell was he going to do with three orphaned children in the middle of a Montana winter? The next morning dawned deceptively calm, but Jake's horse was restless, ears constantly swiveling toward the tree line. Something was out there, watching them. Jake woke the children quietly, finger to his lips. "Get ready to move. Fast." Mary's eyes went wide, but she didn't argue. She learned to trust Jake's instincts for danger. As they hastily packed, Jake caught glimpses of movement through the trees, gray shapes that could have been wolves or something worse. "What's wrong?" Mary whispered as she helped Tommy into his coat. "We've got company," Jake said grimly, checking his rifle. "And they're not friendly." A howl echoed through the forest, long and haunting. Then another. Soon the entire pack was calling, their voices forming a chilling chorus that made Emma whimper in fear. "Wolves?" Tommy asked, his voice small. "Worse," Jake said. "Desperate wolves. Winter's been hard on them too, and we smell like easy prey." Mary pulled the younger children closer, her face pale but determined. "What do we do?" Jake was already saddling his horse, his movements quick and efficient. "We get to my cabin. It's defensible, and I've got more ammunition there. But we need to move now, before they decide to test us." As if summoned by his words, a massive gray wolf stepped out of the tree line, its yellow eyes fixed on the children. It was followed by another, then another, until 6 wolves stood at the edge of their camp, silent and menacing. "Don't run," Jake said quietly, raising his rifle. Running triggers their chase instinct. But before Jake could fire, Mary surprised him by stepping forward, her chin raised defiantly. "You want to know why I don't trust anyone?" she said, her voice shaking but fierce. "Because everyone who was supposed to protect us is dead. Ma and Pa trusted the wrong people, and it got them killed. Those men who burned our wagon, they weren't Indians. They were white men pretending to be Indians, and they—" Her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. "They hurt Mama before they killed her. Made us watch." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and painful. Jake felt rage burn in his chest, but he kept his rifle trained on the lead wolf. "That's why you lied about your aunt in Bozeman," he said gently. "There is no aunt. There's no one. Just us." Mary's voice was barely a whisper. "And now you want us to trust you, to go to your cabin where we'll be trapped if you're like them." The lead wolf took a step closer, sensing weakness in their divided attention. Jake's finger tightened on the trigger. "Mary," he said urgently, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Those men who hurt your family? I'd kill them with my bare hands if I could. But right now, we've got a more immediate problem." The wolf crouched, muscles bunching for a leap. Jake's shot rang out across the clearing, dropping the animal instantly. The rest of the pack scattered, but Jake knew they'd be back. "We need to go. Now." He lifted Emma onto his horse, then helped Tommy up behind her. "Mary, you're riding with me." "I can walk," Mary said stubbornly. Another howl, closer this time. The pack was regrouping. "Not anymore. You can't." Jake swung into the saddle and held out his hand. "Trust has to start somewhere, Mary. And those wolves won't wait for you to make up your mind." Mary stared at his outstretched hand for a heartbeat that felt like eternity. Then she grabbed it and let him pull her up behind him. "Just until spring," she said fiercely. "Just until spring," Jake agreed, spurring his horse toward the trail. But as they rode away from the clearing, Jake caught Mary looking back over his shoulder, watching for pursuit. And he realized that the wolves weren't the only predators they'd have to worry about. The men who'd killed her parents were still out there somewhere. And winter was just beginning. The wolves followed them for 3 hours. Jake could feel their presence like an itch between his shoulder blades, even when he couldn't see them. His horse sensed them too, stepping nervously and fighting the bit whenever the wind shifted to carry their scent. Are they still back there? Mary whispered, her arms tied around Jake's waist. Yes, but they're keeping their distance since I shot their leader. Jake's voice was calm, but his hand never left his rifle. Wolves are smart. They know humans are dangerous when cornered. Like us, Tommy said quietly from his perch behind Emma. Jake glanced back at the boy, surprised by the wisdom in that simple statement. Exactly like us. The trail wound upward through dense pine forest, the snow deeper here where the sun couldn't reach. Jake pushed the pace as much as he dared, but with 2 small children on horseback, they couldn't move fast enough to outrun pursuit. That's when the snow began to fall. Not the gentle dusting they'd had that morning, but thick, heavy flakes that turned the world white within minutes. The kind of storm that could kill travelers caught in the open. There. Jake pointed through the swirling snow to a dark opening in the rocky hillside. Cave. We'll wait it out there. But as they approached the cave, Jake's blood ran cold. Fresh tracks in the snow. Large paw prints leading directly into the darkness. Bear? Mary asked, reading his expression. Grizzly. And she's got cubs. Jake could see smaller tracks alongside the massive prints. This is her winter den. The howl of wolves drifted through the storm, closer now. They were being driven toward the cave by the pack, caught between 2 deadly predators with nowhere else to go. What do we do? Mary's voice was steady, but Jake could feel her trembling. Jake studied the situation, his mind racing through options. The storm was getting worse by the minute. The wolves were closing in. And somewhere in that cave was a mother grizzly who would kill anything that threatened her cubs. We go in, Jake said finally. But carefully. Very carefully. He dismounted, pulling Emma into his arms while helping Tommy down. The little girl was shivering despite her thick wrappings, her lips blue with cold. Mary, I need you to take the children to the back of the cave. Don't go deep, just far enough to be out of the wind. And whatever you hear, whatever happens, don't come back toward the entrance. What about you? Jake checked his rifle, making sure he had a full load. I'm going to have a conversation with Mama Bear. Hopefully a peaceful one. The cave entrance was wide and low, forcing Jake to duck as he entered. The smell hit him immediately, the musky, wild scent of bear mixed with something else. Something that made his stomach turn. Death. Not fresh death, but old. The remains of the bear's autumn kills, cached for winter feeding. Bones and hide scattered across the cave floor, picked clean and beginning to rot. And there, in the deepest shadows, 2 yellow eyes reflecting the dim light from the entrance. The grizzly was massive, easily 7 feet tall even lying down, with cubs the size of small dogs nursing at her side. She watched Jake's approach with the kind of patience that only came from absolute confidence in her ability to destroy any threat. Jake stopped 20 feet away, far enough to avoid triggering a charge, close enough to make his intentions clear. Easy, Mama, he said softly. We're not here to hurt your babies. Just need shelter from the storm. The bear's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, but she didn't move. Behind Jake, he could hear Mary settling the children against the cave wall, whispering reassurances to Emma who was starting to cry. A wolf howl echoed from just outside the cave mouth, and the bear's head lifted sharply. She understood the situation as well as Jake did. They were all trapped together by the storm and the pack. Looks like we've got a common enemy, Jake murmured, never taking his eyes off the massive predator. The bear studied him for a long moment, then deliberately turned her attention back to her cubs. The message was clear. As long as he stayed away from her babies, she'd tolerate his presence. Jake backed slowly toward the cave entrance, settling himself where he could watch for wolves while keeping the bear in his peripheral vision. It was an uneasy truce, but it might just keep them all alive. Papa Jake. Tommy's small voice carried across the cave. Is the bear going to eat us? Not today, Jake replied, surprised by how natural the title sounded. Papa Jake. When had that happened? Because you're protecting us? Mary asked. Jake looked back at the 3 children huddled together against the cave wall, Mary with her arms around both younger siblings, all of them looking at him with complete trust despite everything they'd been through. Because we're family now, he said simply. And family protects each other. Outside, the wind howled and wolves called to each other through the storm. Inside the cave, a grizzly bear nursed her cubs while a man who'd thought himself incapable of love watched over 3 children who'd claimed his heart without asking permission. When the storm finally passed 2 hours later, the wolves had moved on to easier prey. Jake led his makeshift family out of the cave under the bear's watchful gaze, all of them changed by the shared experience of survival. The cabin was only another hour's ride through the fresh snow. But Jake already knew that the real journey, the one that would transform four strangers into a family, had only just begun. 3 weeks into their arrangement, Jake thought they might actually make it through the winter. The children had settled into routines, Mary helping with cooking and mending, Tommy feeding the chickens and gathering eggs from Jake's small coop, Emma toddling around the cabin and babbling happily at anyone who would listen. Jake had even started to enjoy their company. Mary was whip-smart, quick with numbers, and able to read better than most adults he knew. Tommy was eager to learn everything Jake could teach him about horses and hunting and surviving in the wilderness. And Emma had claimed Jake's heart the first time she raised her arms to him, wanting to be picked up. But their peaceful existence shattered on a gray February morning when Jake was returning from checking his snares. He crested the hill overlooking his cabin and saw them, 3 riders dismounted near his door, their horses steaming in the cold air. Jake's blood ran cold. He recognized the lead rider, Bill Garrett, the territorial sheriff from Bozeman. A decent enough man in town, but one who followed the letter of the law without much regard for circumstances. The 2 men with him wore the hard look of bounty hunters or worse. Jake spurred his horse down the hill, his mind racing. How had they found this place? What did they want? He got his answer as soon as he dismounted. Jake Morrison? Sheriff Garrett's voice was formal, official. We need to talk. About what? Jake kept his voice level, but his hand stayed near his gun. About the 3 children you're harboring. Children who belong to the Whitmore family back in Kansas. Jake's heart stopped. What are you talking about? One of the bounty hunters, a thin man with cruel eyes, stepped forward. Those orphans you got in there. They're worth $500 to their rightful guardians. The Whitmore family's been looking for them since they went missing. Guardians. Jake's voice was sharp. Their parents are dead. Their grandmother's still alive, Sheriff Garrett said, though he looked uncomfortable. Lives in Kansas with her son's family. They've got legal claim to the children. Through the cabin window, Jake could see Mary's face pressed against the glass, her eyes wide with terror. She'd heard every word. And if the children don't want to go? Jake asked. The cruel-eyed bounty hunter laughed. Don't matter what they want. They're children. Family's family, and the law's the law. But Jake had seen the fear in Mary's eyes, and he'd heard the stories she'd whispered late at night about relatives who didn't want them, who saw them as burdens to be passed off to anyone who would take them. The Whitmore family might have legal claim, but Jake doubted they had the children's best interests at heart. They're settled here, Jake said carefully. It's the middle of winter. Traveling would be dangerous. Which is why we're not taking them today, Sheriff Garrett said. But come spring, when the pass is clear, they're going back to Kansas. Their families already paid these men to escort them home. The bounty hunters exchanged a look that made Jake's skin crawl. $500 was a lot of money for transporting 3 small children. But men like these didn't work for transport fees. They worked for other reasons. I want to see the legal papers, Jake said. Sheriff Garrett handed over a worn document. Jake scanned it quickly, his heart sinking. It looked official enough. A petition for custody filed by one Samuel Whitmore of Topeka, Kansas, claiming guardianship of his deceased brother's children. You've got until April, the sheriff said. When the snow melts, we'll be back. After they rode away, Jake stood in the cold for a long time, staring at the papers in his hand. Inside the cabin, he could hear Mary crying and Tommy asking confused questions about why the bad men wanted to take them away. Jake had 2 months to figure out how to protect 3 children from a legal system that didn't care about their happiness or safety. 2 months to find a way to keep the closest thing to a family he'd ever had. The problem was, he didn't know how to fight the law. He only knew how to fight men. And that might not be enough this time. The visit from the sheriff changed everything, but not in the way Jake expected. Instead of driving them apart, the threat seemed to fuse them together like metal in a forge. The children clung closer to Jake, and he found himself unable to sleep, constantly checking the windows for signs of approaching riders. 3 days after the sheriff's visit, Jake was chopping wood behind the cabin when Mary appeared at his side, her face pale with worry. I've been thinking about what that man said, she began without preamble. About the Whitmores having legal claim to us. Jake's axe bit deep into the log, the sharp crack echoing across the clearing. Don't worry about that. I'll figure something out. What if you can't? Mary's voice was steady, but Jake could see the fear in her eyes. What if they really do take us away in April? Jake set down the axe and turned to face her fully. Mary, look at me. I promise you, on my sister's grave, that I will not let anyone take you children away from me. Not the law, not the Whitmores, not anybody. But how can you promise that? You're just one man against. Against what? A corrupt system that doesn't care about what's best for children. Jake's voice was fierce. I've fought worse odds than that. Mary studied his face, searching for something. Tell me about your sister. The one you mentioned before. Jake was quiet for so long that Mary thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. Her name was Sarah. She was 12 when I left home, about your age now. He was a hard man. Drank too much, used his fists when he was angry. Ma died when Sarah was 8, and after that, Jake's hands clenched into fists. I should have taken her with me when I left. Should have found a way to protect her. What happened to her? Pa sold her. Jake said simply, the words like broken glass in his throat. To a man who promised to give her a good home, education, all the things Pa said I couldn't provide. I found out later the man ran a place where wealthy men paid to hurt children. Mary's sharp intake of breath told Jake she understood exactly what kind of place he meant. I went back for her as soon as I heard. But I was too late. She'd died of fever the winter before, locked in a room with no heat, no medicine, no one who cared if she lived or died. Jake's voice broke. She was 14 years old. Mary stepped closer and, without asking permission, took Jake's scarred hand in both of hers. That's why you saved us. You're trying to save her. Maybe, Jake admitted. Or maybe you three saved me. I was half dead inside before I found you in that snowstorm. Didn't even know it until I heard Emma laugh for the first time. A commotion from the cabin interrupted them. Tommy's excited shouts mixed with Emma's delighted squeals. They hurried around to the front of the cabin to find Tommy teaching Emma to stack blocks he'd carved from wood scraps, while she knocked them down with gleeful determination. Again, Emma demanded in her baby talk, clapping her hands. She says that every time, Tommy said proudly. I think she likes the noise. Jake watched them play, feeling something warm and fierce expand in his chest. This was what family looked like. Not blood or legal papers, but love and protection and the choice to stand together against whatever came. Jake, Mary said quietly, there's something else I need to tell you. About the money. Jake's attention snapped back to her. What money? The inheritance I mentioned to the sheriff. It's not just $2,000. Mary's voice was barely a whisper. It's $5,000. Pa never told anyone the real amount, not even Ma. But before he died, he made me promise to keep the secret until I was old enough to claim it myself. Jake felt his pulse quicken. $5,000 was serious money on the frontier, enough to buy a good ranch, start a real business, secure a future for 3 children. No wonder the Whitmores were suddenly interested in their family duty. Where is it? He asked. In a bank in Denver. Pa set it up so only I could claim it when I turn 18. But if something happens to me... Mary swallowed hard. If I die or disappear, it goes to my nearest blood relative. The Whitmores. The Whitmores, Mary confirmed. 5,000 reasons why they'll never stop trying to get us back. Jake understood now why the sheriff had seemed so confident, why the bounty hunters had been willing to risk federal charges. With that much money at stake, they wouldn't give up easily. But as he looked at Mary's frightened face, at Tommy patiently rebuilding his blocks for Emma's amusement, at the trust in their eyes when they looked at him, Jake made a decision that would change all their lives. Then we'll have to make sure you live to claim it yourself, he said firmly. All of you. Together. That night, as the children slept, Jake sat by the fire making plans. $5,000 meant they were fighting more than just corruption. They were fighting greed that would bring dangerous men from hundreds of miles away. But it also gave them options. If Mary could claim the money herself, she could choose her own guardians. She could choose him. 6 more years. That's all they needed. 6 years to keep these children safe until Mary came of age and could claim her inheritance. Jake stared into the flames and made a silent vow. He would give them those 6 years, whatever it took. Even if it cost him everything. Even if it cost him his life. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm so scared they'll take us back there, and Uncle Samuel will. He'll hurt us. He used to hurt Pa when they were boys. Pa told me stories. Jake knelt beside her, gathering her into his arms the way he would have hugged his own sister if she'd lived. Mary, listen to me. I'm going to fight for you. All of you. Whatever it takes. But what if it's not enough? What if the law doesn't care what we want? Then we'll make our own law, Jake said grimly. This is Montana territory. Out here, a man protects what's his. And you 3 are mine now, whether some judge in Kansas agrees or not. Mary clung to him, and Jake felt something shift in his chest. The last wall around his heart crumbled, and he understood with startling clarity that he would kill for these children. Die for them. Whatever it took to keep them safe. I love you, Papa Jake, Mary whispered, and Jake's throat closed with emotion. I love you too, little girl. All of you. More than I ever thought possible. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, but inside their small cabin, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the children he'd claimed as his own, Jake Morrison was no longer alone. He had a family to protect, and God help anyone who tried to take them from him. March came with a fall spring that melted the snow and turned the world to mud, only to freeze again into treacherous ice. Jake used the brief thought a ride to town, ostensibly for supplies, but really to learn what he could about adoption laws and find a lawyer willing to help. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The territorial laws were clear. Blood relatives had first claim to orphaned children, and Samuel Whitmore's petition had already been approved by a judge in Kansas. Worse, Jake learned that Whitmore had connections. His wife's brother was a territorial legislator, and they'd used their influence to expedite the process. The lawyer Jake consulted, a thin man named Henderson, was brutally honest. You have no legal standing, Mr. Morrison. You're an unmarried man with no blood relation to these children. The court will never grant you custody over a blood relative, especially one with political connections. Even if that relative is unfit? Even if the children don't want to go? Henderson shrugged. The children's wishes don't matter legally. They're minors. And proving unfitness would require testimony, evidence. Do you have any proof that Samuel Whitmore has abused or neglected children in his care? Jake didn't. Only Mary's frightened whispers and his own instincts. He returned to the cabin with a heavy heart and devastating news. When he told Mary what he'd learned, she went white as snow. There has to be something, she whispered. Some way to fight them. Jake wished he could give her hope, but the truth was inescapable. Come April, when the passes cleared, the bounty hunters would return. And legally, he had no choice but to hand over the children. Unless. The thought that came to him was so desperate, so dangerous, that he pushed it away immediately. But it kept returning, growing stronger each day as April approached. He could run. Take the children and disappear into the wilderness, maybe head to Canada or deep into the mountains where no law could reach them. It would mean giving up everything he'd built, living as fugitives, but at least they'd be together. But even as the plan took shape in his mind, Jake knew it was hopeless. They couldn't live on the run forever, especially not with 3 children. And if they were caught, the consequences would be far worse than simple separation. The crisis came sooner than expected. Jake was teaching Tommy to whittle on a warm afternoon when Emma, who had been playing near the cabin, suddenly started crying. Not her usual fussy cry, but screams of real terror. Jake and Mary rushed outside to find 2 men on horseback at the edge of the clearing. Not the sheriff or the bounty hunters from before. These men were rougher, harder, with the look of drifters who'd do anything for money. You Jake Morrison? The larger man called out. He had a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, and his hand rested casually on his gun butt. Depends who's asking, Jake replied, stepping protectively in front of the children. Name's Carter. This here's my partner, Webb. We're here for the Whitmore children. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. It's not April yet, the sheriff said. Plans changed. Carter interrupted with a cold smile. Mr. Whitmore got impatient. Decided he wanted his property back right now. These children aren't property. Law says different. Now, you can hand them over easy, or we can take them hard. But either way, they're coming with us. Behind Jake, Mary grabbed Tommy's hand, pulling him toward the cabin. Emma was still crying, sensing the danger even if she couldn't understand it. I want to see legal papers, Jake said, playing for time. Carter laughed. Don't need papers. Whitmore's paying us $500 to bring them back, and that's all the authority we need. The sheriff knows about this? Sheriff's got no jurisdiction over family matters. These kids belong to Samuel Whitmore, and we're just helping him collect what's his. It was then that Jake understood the truth. These weren't legal guardians or even legitimate bounty hunters. They were kidnappers, paid to steal children under the cover of family rights. And if he let them take Mary, Tommy, and Emma, he might never see them again. Mary, he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the 2 men. Take Tommy and Emma inside. Lock the door. But, do it. Now. Mary's voice was steady despite her fear. Come on, Tommy. Bring Emma. The children disappeared into the cabin, and Jake heard the heavy bar slide across the door. Good. At least they were protected for the moment. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Carter said, dismounting from his horse. Webb followed suit, both men spreading out to flank Jake. Funny thing about hard men, Jake said conversationally, his hand moving to his gun. They always think everyone else is going to be easy. Carter's smile turned savage. You willing to die for 3 children that aren't even yours? Jake's Colt cleared leather in one smooth motion, the barrel aimed at Carter's chest. Try me. For a heartbeat, the world was perfectly still. Then Webb went for his gun, and Jake's world exploded into violence. The gunfight lasted less than 30 seconds. Jake's first shot took Carter center mass, the big man's eyes going wide with surprise before he crumpled to the ground. Webb's shot went wide, spooked by his partner's sudden death, and Jake's second bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying. Webb fell to his knees, clutching his bleeding shoulder and staring at Jake with terror and rage. You shot me. You crazy bastard, you shot me. And I'll shoot you again if you don't start talking, Jake said grimly, keeping his gun trained on the wounded man. Who sent you? And don't tell me it was Samuel Whitmore. I know kidnapping when I see it. Webb's face was gray with pain and shock. I don't know what you're talking about. Jake cocked his pistol, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Last chance. All right. Webb gasped. It was Garrett, the sheriff. He's got to deal with some people back east. They pay good money for certain kinds of children. Jake's blood turned to ice. What kind of deal? Children that nobody will miss. Orphans, mostly. Pretty little girls especially. Sheriff's got connections back east. Mining bosses, railroad men who pay well for young company. The horror of it hit Jake like a physical blow. Mary, with her delicate features and fierce spirit. Emma, barely more than a baby. These men hadn't come to return the children to family. They'd come to sell them to wealthy predators who preyed on the vulnerable. The Whitmore story? Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. Made up. Garrett forged the papers, used his connections to make it look legal. Figured nobody would question a sheriff's word about family reunification. Jake felt rage, pure and cold, flow through his veins. Sheriff Garrett, a man sworn to protect the innocent, was trafficking children. And he'd almost handed Mary, Tommy, and Emma over to them without a fight. How many children? Jake asked. I don't know. Maybe a dozen over the past year. Orphans from wagon trains, children whose parents died of fever. Easy targets. Jake's finger tightened on the trigger. It would be so easy to end this right now, to make sure Webb never hurt another child. But he forced himself to think clearly. A dead man couldn't testify, and Jake was going to need proof of what he'd learned. You're going to write down everything you just told me, Jake said. Every detail about Garrett's operation, every child you know about. And then you're going to help me stop it. Webb laughed bitterly. Help you? Why would I do that? Because the alternative is a shallow grave next to your partner there. The cabin door opened, and Mary's voice called out tentatively. Papa Jake? Are you all right? I'm fine, sweetheart. Stay inside for a few more minutes. But Jake's heart was breaking as he said it. Because the truth was, none of them were all right. The danger was far from over, and now Jake understood the real scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just about keeping 3 children from an abusive relative. This was about stopping a network of child traffickers who had the law on their side. And Jake was just one man with a gun and a fierce determination to protect his family. As he tied up Webb's wound and forced the man to write out his confession, Jake's mind raced through possibilities. He could take the confession to federal authorities, but that would mean leaving the children vulnerable while he traveled. He could try to contact other law enforcement, but how many of them were involved in Garrett's network? The sound of approaching horses made the decision for him. Through the trees, Jake could see riders, at least 6 of them, coming fast. At the head of the group rode Sheriff Garrett himself, his face set in grim determination. Looks like your boss is here, Jake told Webb grimly. Webb's face went white. He's not here to negotiate. If he finds out I told you about the operation, then you better hope I can protect you better than you protected those children you helped steal. Jake grabbed his rifle from the cabin and checked his ammunition. 6 rounds in the gun, maybe 20 more in his belt. Against 6 men, it wasn't good odds. But as he looked through the window at Mary helping Tommy comfort Emma, as he saw the trust in their eyes and the way they looked to him for protection, Jake knew he didn't have a choice. This was his family, his responsibility, his fight. Mary, he called softly. Come here, sweetheart. She approached cautiously, her young face grave with the weight of too much knowledge. I need you to listen very carefully, Jake said. Some bad men are coming, and I'm going to have to fight them. If something happens to me. No, Mary said fiercely. Nothing's going to happen to you. If something happens, Jake continued gently, I want you to take Tommy and Emma and go to the root cellar. There's a tunnel I dug last summer that leads to the old mine shaft. Follow it to the end, then head north until you reach the trading post at Bear Creek. Tell them Jake Morrison sent you, and that you need help getting to the territorial marshal in Helena. Mary's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded bravely. What about you? Jake cupped her face in his hands, memorizing every detail. I'm going to make sure those men never hurt another child. And I'm going to come back to you, I promise. I love you, Papa Jake. I love you too, little girl. All of you. More than my own life. The riders were close now, close enough that Jake could hear Garrett shouting orders. Time had run out. Jake kissed Mary's forehead, then gently pushed her toward the back of the cabin. Go. Take care of your brother and sister. As Mary gathered the younger children and led them toward the root cellar, Jake took his position by the window. Through the glass, he could see Garrett and his men spreading out around the cabin, cutting off escape routes. Webb, still tied up and bleeding, looked at Jake with something like respect. You know you can't win this, right? 6 against 1, and Garrett's got the law on his side. Maybe, Jake said, checking his rifle one more time. But I'm not fighting for myself anymore. I'm fighting for them. And a man fighting for his children, well, that makes him mighty dangerous. Outside, Garrett's voice boomed across the clearing. Morrison, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up, and nobody has to get hurt. Jake's response was to put a bullet through the sheriff's hat, knocking it clean off his head. I guess that's a no. Garrett called out, diving for cover behind a fallen log. The battle for Jake's family was about to begin. The siege began with a hail of gunfire that shattered Jake's windows and sent splinters flying from the cabin walls. Jake rolled away from the window, keeping low as bullets whined overhead. 6 men with rifles against 1 man in a cabin. It should have been over quickly. But Jake had advantages they didn't count on. He knew every inch of his property, every rock and tree that could provide cover. More importantly, he was fighting for something more precious than his own life. Morrison, Garrett's voice carried across the clearing. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Send out the children, and maybe we can work something out. Jake's answer was another rifle shot, this one aimed at the deputy crouched behind his horse. The bullet took the man in the leg, and his screams echoed through the forest. 5 against 1 now. Jake called back. Who's next? But even as he spoke, Jake knew he was running out of time and ammunition. The men were moving closer, using the trees and rocks for cover, trying to surround the cabin. Soon they'd be close enough to rush him, and then it would be over. A sound from behind made him spin around, rifle ready. But it was only Mary, emerging from the root cellar with determination written across her young face. I told you to stay hidden, Jake said urgently. Tommy and Emma are safe in the tunnel, Mary replied. But you need help. Mary, you can't, I can shoot, she interrupted. Pa taught me before he died. I'm a good shot. Jake stared at her, seeing not the frightened child he'd rescued from the snow, but a young woman with steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. She was right, she could help. But the thought of putting a gun in her hands, of exposing her to violence. Please, Mary said quietly. Let me help protect our family. Our family. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. That's what they were now, weren't they? Not just 3 orphans he was sheltering, but his daughter, his son, his baby girl. His family. Jake handed her his spare pistol, checking to make sure it was loaded. Stay low. Don't shoot unless you have a clear target. And if things go bad. They won't, Mary said with quiet confidence. We won't let them. The attack came from 3 sides at once. 2 men rushed the front of the cabin while another tried to circle around back. Jake's rifle barked twice, dropping one attacker and wounding another. Mary's pistol cracked from the rear window, and Jake heard a man curse and scramble for better cover. Nice shot, Jake called to her. Pa always said I had a steady hand. But their small victory was short-lived. Jake could hear movement on the roof. Someone was trying to come down the chimney. He grabbed his pistol and fired up the flue, rewarded by a scream and the sound of a body falling. For left, Mary reported from her window. Jake was reloading when he heard the sound that made his blood freeze. Horses approaching from the south. More men? If Garrett had reinforcements coming. But the voice that rang out across the clearing wasn't one of Garrett's men. This is U.S. Marshal William Travis. Everyone throw down your weapons. Jake risked a look out his shattered window, and saw something that made his heart leap with hope. A dozen federal marshals were riding into the clearing, rifles ready, surrounding Garrett and his remaining men. "What the hell?" Garrett snarled, but Jake could see the panic in the corrupt sheriff's eyes. Marshal Travis was a big man with iron-gray hair and the bearing of someone used to command. "Sheriff Garrett, you're under arrest for trafficking in human beings, conspiracy, and attempted kidnapping. You can't prove anything." Garrett blustered. "I'm here on official business, collecting children for their legal guardian." "Is that so?" Travis held up a piece of paper. "Then maybe you can explain this confession, signed by one of your associates. Details a very interesting operation involving missing children and certain wealthy patrons back east." Jake saw Webb tied up near the cabin and realized the wounded man had made a choice. Maybe seeing Jake fight so desperately for children who weren't even his blood had touched something human in the kidnapper's soul. "Morrison," Travis called. "I understand you have 3 children in there who need protection." Jake emerged from the cabin slowly, Mary beside him, both still armed but no longer pointing their weapons at anyone. "Yes, sir," Jake replied. "And I'm not giving them up to anybody without a fight." Travis studied Jake for a long moment, taking in his defensive posture, the way Mary stood close to his side like a daughter seeking protection from her father. "From what I understand, Mr. Morrison, those children are lucky to have found someone willing to fight for them. The federal government has been investigating Sheriff Garrett's operation for months. Your situation gave us the break we needed." "What does that mean for the children?" Jake asked, his voice tight with worry. "It means they're safe. The so-called family claim was fabricated as part of Garrett's trafficking network. As far as the law is concerned, you're their legal guardian now, if that's what you want." Jake felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. "What I want? Marshal, I'd fight the whole territorial government to keep these children." "I can see that," Travis said with something like admiration. "The question is, do they want to stay with you?" On cue, Tommy and Emma emerged from the root cellar, having heard the shooting stop. Tommy ran straight to Jake and wrapped his arms around the man's waist. "Papa Jake, are you hurt? Are the bad men gone?" Jake lifted the boy up, holding him tight while Emma toddled over and raised her arms to be picked up too. With one child on each arm and Mary pressed close to his side, Jake looked up at Marshal Travis. "I think that answers your question, Marshal." Travis smiled, the first genuine warmth Jake had seen from any lawman in months. "I think it does indeed." As Garrett and his surviving men were loaded into wagons under heavy guard, Jake finally allowed himself to believe it was over. The children were safe. They were legally his now. They could stay. But it was Mary who surprised him, stepping forward to address Marshal Travis directly. "Sir? There were other children. The bad men took other children before they came for us. Are you going to find them?" Travis's expression grew grave. "We're going to try, miss. With the evidence we've gathered and the testimony from Mr. Webb there, we should be able to track down the whole network." "Good," Mary said with fierce satisfaction. "Nobody should have to be afraid like we were." Jake looked down at his daughter, because that's what she was now, in every way that mattered, and felt his heart swell with pride. She'd been through hell, but instead of being broken by it, she'd become stronger. They all had. 3 weeks later, the morning sun streamed through the cabin windows as Jake watched Mary pack a small bag with careful precision. Today was the day they'd all been waiting for and dreading. Mary's 16th birthday, when she could legally claim her inheritance and choose her own guardians. The federal marshal was riding up from Helena with a territorial judge to make everything official. After the trafficking ring had been exposed, the authorities wanted to ensure there were no more legal loopholes that predators could exploit. "You nervous?" Jake asked, settling beside Mary at the kitchen table. "Terrified," she admitted, then looked up with a smile that reminded him painfully of his lost sister. But the good kind of terrified. Like when you're about to do something that will change your whole life. "Papa Jake." Tommy burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement. "The marshal's coming up the hill, and there's a whole bunch of other riders with him." Jake's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, old habits dying hard. But through the window, he could see the official escort, 2 federal marshals, the territorial judge, and what looked like a newspaper reporter from Helena. "Showtime," Mary said softly. The proceedings were simpler than Jake had expected. Judge Morrison, no relation, despite the shared name, was a stern man in his 60s who'd traveled from the territorial capital specifically for this case. "Miss Whitmore," the judge began, then caught herself. "I'm sorry, Miss Morrison. That's what you prefer to be called now, isn't it?" "Yes, ma'am," Mary said firmly. "Mary Catherine Morrison." "Very well. You understand that upon claiming your inheritance, you have the legal right to choose your own guardians until you reach the age of majority. I do, Your Honor. And you understand that this decision, once made official, cannot be easily reversed? Mary glanced at Jake, who gave her an encouraging nod. She'd grown so much in the past months, not just physically, but in confidence and strength. She stood now like a young woman who knew her own mind. I understand completely, Your Honor. I choose Jake Morrison as legal guardian for myself and my siblings. He's already our father in every way that matters. The judge made notes in her ledger, then looked up at Jake. Mr. Morrison, do you accept this responsibility? 3 children represents a significant obligation, both financially and emotionally. Your Honor, Jake said, getting to his feet. These children saved my life as much as I saved theirs. I'd be honored to be their legal father. Very well. The judge signed the papers with a flourish. The matter is settled. Mr. Morrison, you are now the legal guardian of Mary, Thomas, and Emma Morrison. Miss Morrison, you are now free to claim your inheritance as you see fit. The reporter scribbled furiously as Marshal Travis stepped forward. There's one more thing, Jake. We recovered most of the money that Garrett and his people stole from other families. The territorial government has decided to establish a fund for orphan children to prevent this kind of exploitation in the future. We'd like Mary to serve on the oversight committee when she's ready. Mary's eyes went wide. Me? But I'm just 16. You're a survivor who understands what these children face, Travis said gently. Your voice matters. Jake felt his chest swell with pride as Mary straightened her shoulders, accepting the responsibility with the same courage she'd shown throughout their ordeal. I'd be honored to help, she said simply. That evening, after the officials had departed and the inheritance paperwork had been filed, the Morrison family gathered around their dinner table for the first time as legal relatives. Emma babbled happily in her high chair, smearing mashed carrots across her face. Tommy was practically vibrating with excitement about the new horse Jake had promised him for his birthday next month. So what now? Mary asked, cutting into the venison roast she'd prepared for their celebration dinner. Now we live, Jake said simply. We build a future. Tommy, you'll start real school next fall. There's a new teacher coming to town who can take you further than I can with reading and arithmetic. Tommy's face fell slightly. Does that mean I can't help with the ranch anymore? Education first, ranch work second, Jake said firmly. But there'll always be chores waiting when you get home from school. What about me? Mary asked. I want to learn more about business, about managing money. If I'm going to help other children, I need to understand how these legal things work. Jake nodded approvingly. There's a correspondence course through the Territorial University. We can afford it now, thanks to your inheritance. Our inheritance, Mary corrected firmly. This money belongs to all of us. We're family. A knock at the door interrupted their dinner. Jake opened it to find Dr. Sarah Chun standing on the porch, holding a covered basket and looking slightly nervous. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said. I brought a cake to celebrate Mary's birthday, and the new family arrangement. Dr. Sarah, Emma squealed from her high chair, reaching out with carrot-covered hands. Come in, Jake said, stepping back to let her enter. We were just talking about the future. As Sarah settled into the chair Jake held for her, accepting a plate of Mary's excellent cooking, Jake looked around the table at the people who'd become his world. Mary, poised and mature beyond her years, but still young enough to laugh at Tommy's silly jokes. Tommy, growing stronger and more confident every day, yet still small enough to crawl into Jake's lap when thunderstorms scared him. Emma, barely past babyhood, but already showing signs of the fierce independence that ran in the Morrison family blood. And Sarah, who'd become part of their lives so gradually that Jake could hardly remember what dinner conversations had been like without her gentle humor and quick intelligence. I have an announcement, Jake said, surprising himself with the words. Around the table, all conversation stopped. What is it, Papa Jake? Tommy asked with the solemnity of a child who'd learned that announcements could change everything. Jake looked at Sarah, who was watching him with curious eyes. They'd been dancing around their feelings for months, both too careful of the children's stability to rush into anything. But looking at her now, surrounded by his family and fitting so perfectly into their lives, Jake knew it was time to take a chance on happiness. Dr. Chun, he said formally, causing Sarah to raise her eyebrows in surprise. I wonder if you'd do me the honor of becoming my wife. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Then Mary started laughing, a sound of pure joy that filled the cabin. "About time," she said, grinning at both adults. "We've been waiting for you two to figure it out for months." Sarah's face had gone bright red, but she was smiling as she looked around the table at three expectant faces. Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'd be honored to marry you, Jake Morrison. All of you." Emma clapped her hands and squealed with delight, though Jake doubted she understood what was happening. Tommy hooped and nearly fell off his chair. Mary got up and hugged both Jake and Sarah, tears streaming down her face. "Does this mean Dr. Sarah will live here with us?" Tommy asked hopefully. "If she wants to," Jake said, reaching across the table to take Sarah's hand. "I can't think of anywhere I'd rather be," Sarah said softly. As the evening wound down, with wedding plans being discussed and Emma finally falling asleep in Jake's arms, Jake stepped out onto the porch for a moment of quiet reflection. The stars were brilliant in the clear Montana sky, and somewhere in the distance, a night bird called to its mate. Mary joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cool air. "Happy?" she asked simply. Jake looked through the window at Tommy helping Sarah clear the dinner dishes while Emma dozed in her high chair, at the warm light spilling out into the darkness, at the life they'd all built together from the ashes of tragedy. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he said honestly. "Good," Mary said with satisfaction. "You deserve it. We all do." Jake put his arm around his daughter, because that's what she was, papers or no papers, blood or no blood, and together they watched the first snowflakes of winter begin to fall. A year ago, snow had nearly killed them all. Tonight, it looked like a blessing, covering their small piece of the world in pristine white, promising a clean start and a future full of possibilities. The three orphans he'd found in a blizzard had become his children. The lonely cabin had become a home. The man who'd thought himself incapable of love had discovered that family wasn't about blood or law or circumstance. It was about choice. The choice to stay when leaving would be easier. The choice to fight when surrender would be safer. The choice to love when loss seemed inevitable. Jake Morrison had made his choice. And as he stood on his porch with his daughter beside him and his family safe in the warm light behind him, he knew he'd choose the same way again in a heartbeat. He was no longer alone in the wilderness. He was home.